What's up guys, Matt here from Work Training. Welcome to Mace Basics. What we're going to do today is we're going to go through some of the tips and tricks that you're going to need to know before you start moving that mace around, and then we're going to get into some of the basic exercises that you're already familiar with through your training. And what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate the mace so that you can get familiar with the different variations of these exercises that you can do utilizing this unique tool to challenge your workouts and improve your overall fitness. I'm going to take some time to go over two very key things that we want to address before we start swinging our mace around. And those two things are our stable positioning and a little bit of a warm-up, because we want to make sure our joints and the rest of our body is nice and prepped to move that mace around effectively and safely. So what we're going to do first is we're going to address that stable position. Now, the stable position is something that you want to make sure that you're keeping throughout the entirety of your workout. And as your reps start to go up, as your weights start to go up, as you start getting into some more complicated mace movements, that stable position is never going to change. And what I did is I broke that down into two pretty simple keys for you to remember as you start getting more into your workouts, whether that be with a mace or any type of a workout. This is something that a lot of personal trainers like myself or coaches will continue to hammer because we want to make sure that your back is safe and the rest of your body is safe from injury. So what I did is I broke that stable position down into two key steps, which is chest proud and core tight. So when we think about that chest proud, we're pushing that chest out, all right, like you just want to fight, or you just got that big promotion. We don't want to get obnoxious with it. We're not out here pushing that chest out. We're just pulling those shoulders back and we're dropping that chest nice and tall. We're dropping those lats down behind you and we're nice and tall and tight there in your chest. And then what we're going to do after that is core tight. So chest proud, core tight. And what that does is, even if you are getting a little obnoxious with pushing that chest out, that core tight is going to bring those ribs back down, okay? So the way that I address the core tight with my clients is, if I were to tell you that I'm going to run up on you and punch you in the stomach in 3 seconds, what are you going to do? You're going to brace that stomach so that you can take the veracity of my right hook. So those two key steps again are chest proud and core tight. That core tight, like I said, is going to bring those ribs back down. And what that's going to do is, as you can see, I'm pulling those shoulders back and then I'm tightening that core. So what does that do? That keeps my spine in a nice, neutral, stable position no matter what I'm doing, okay? So you want to keep those 2 points in the back of your head when you're doing any kind of a workout with a mace or in general. Chest proud, core tight, and that's going to give you a good place to start. Now that we have our stable position set and ready to go, what we're going to do is we're going to jump into a little bit of a warm-up, because you want to make sure that your body and your joints are primed for whatever mace workout that you're going to jump into. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to simply do some wrist rolls. You're going to do 5 nice, slow, controlled, going from in to out. So if you take that thumb, come all the way up, and then come all the way back out, and then after you do those 5, you're going to reverse it. So you're going to feel, after you do 1 or 2 workouts with the mace, you're going to realize that those forearms, those wrists, those hands, those fingers, they're all a little bit tight because you're working a lot of that grip there in your forearms and in your wrists. All right, so you want to make sure that you give those wrists the same amount of love and the same amount of warm-up that you would for anything else, because they're working hard while you're moving that mace around. All right, so after that, we're going to do the same thing for our elbows. So we're going to put one arm out, and we're just going to roll that elbow up and around. So you want to try and corkscrew that shoulder. That's going to give a good warm up there in your elbow, and it's also going to give you a little bit of rotation. We're going to get into some more rotation in the shoulder there a little bit later. But we want to try and roll that elbow, corkscrew that shoulder all the way through, and you're going to feel that tricep fire up. You're going to feel your shoulder and your elbow fire up there. So go ahead and give me 5 there on the other side. Really try and push that end range of motion, both going forward and going backward. Like I said, that'll give you that forearm, that tricep, that shoulder, that elbow, a nice little bit of a warm up there. So after that, we're going to get into that shoulder rotation. The first one that we're going to do is we're going to go fists up, and what we're going to do is we're just going to push back through that end range of motion. All right, you're going to push that fist back behind you, and then let up, and then come back up. So push, and let up. Push. You're trying to rotate that shoulder. Even though it may not look like you're going back too far, you're still opening up that chest, opening up that shoulder to give you a little bit of that rotational warm up. So as we're kind of moving that mace around, it's very important that we warm up that upward rotation in our shoulder. So what we're going to do next is we're going to isolate on one side. We're going to go all the way up and around. We're going to face that palm in. Remember, keep that stable position, chest proud, core tight. Get to that end range of motion at the top, flip your hand around, and then come all the way through. All right, what you want to try and avoid is rotating those shoulders or rotating those hips. You want to keep that nice stable position, find that end range of motion, flip the hand, and come all the way through. All right, let's do 2 more there. All the way up, flip, and back through. All right, we're going to give 5 there on the other side. What happens is we have a lot of imbalances through our body. So you see that my left shoulder here doesn't rotate as freely as my right shoulder. All right, I've had some issues there through my pec and my shoulder throughout the years. And you'll see that my rotation through that left shoulder is not as fluid as the one on the right. And that's what's going to happen when you go through, certain types of training, certain types of movements and things like that. You're always just naturally imbalanced. And that's actually what the mace helps to correct a little bit, is because you're constantly moving side to side. You're getting the same amount of work moving side to side. All right, so next what we're going to do is we're going to work those shoulder blades a little bit. So you want to find that nice stable position, chest proud, core tight. We're going to pull those elbows back behind you. You're going to feel those shoulder blades close, and then you're going to drive those fists forward, open up those shoulder blades behind you. So all you want is your shoulder blades and your arms to be moving here. Don't tuck that chin, don't move your hips, just push forward, open up those shoulder blades, pull back, and close them. All right, so you want to kind of think of that almost as an elevator door, those shoulder blades closing, and then push and open them up behind you. All right, so you have all those little muscles that are attached to your shoulder blade to move them up, down, and around. We want to fire those up a little bit and make sure that we're recruiting all of those muscles there behind you to stabilize your shoulder as you're moving the mace. So next we're going to get into our hinge. So our hinge pattern heavily relies on that chest proud, core tight. So make sure we're in that position. You want to go about shoulder width through your feet. Chest proud, core tight. And what we're going to do is we're just going to drop that chest to the floor like we're bowing. And you're going to push that hip up there behind you, almost back towards the wall. All right, so drive that hip back. We'll do 5 here. You should feel those hamstrings fire up. Get a nice good stretch there at the bottom. Come up, and then reaffirm that nice stable position at the top. So let's get 2 more there. This is going to fire up those hamstrings. And then next, what we're going to do is we're going to do a kickstand hinge. So we're going to isolate one hamstring. What you want to do is put that one lead foot down, and then you're going to pull up your heel on that opposite side. And from there, we're going to hinge that same pattern, but you're going to isolate on that one hamstring with the foot in front. So let's do 3 there on each side. I'll switch here so you can see. We're going to put that lead foot in front. You can put your toes almost lined up with your heel there, whatever is comfortable for your balance. Chest proud, core tight. Drop those shoulders to the floor. Push that hip back behind you. You're going to isolate that hamstring there. And that's going to come into play because as you start doing movements that are utilizing that hinge with the mace, you want to make sure that that core is tight because the weight's going to be pulling you side to side, but we want to isolate the muscles that we're working on. So in a kickstand hinge, you're isolating strictly on that hamstring, but you're also working through your core to stabilize that weight. So the last one we're going to do is hip pushes out to the corners. So if you think about the 2 corners of the room, we're in that nice stable position, about shoulder width there in our legs. We're going to push that hip back behind us, and you're going to feel that hip joint really load up there through your glute. And then you're going to come up, back up through to that stable position, and then you're going to push out towards the other side. It's very important that you reaffirm that stable position at the top, push that hip out to the corner, and then come back up. We're going to do 3 there on each side. So 1 more here each. Push, 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 push. You're going to feel that hip really load up. Come back up and switch. So that gives you a little bit of a warm up there through your whole body. Your joints, your upper body are nice and loose. You got a little bit of a warm up there through your hips, which is very important as you're stabilizing that weight side to side with your mace. All right, you got your stable positioning down, you're nice and warmed up, and you got your mace ready to go. I know you want to start tossing it around, and we're going to get to that. What we're going to do here first today is we're going to go through a lot of the basic movements that you already know, whether that be a squat, a press, a hinge, a row, all kinds of the basic movements that you've been doing already with an evenly balanced load, and we're going to take that mace and we're going to make them a hell of a lot more difficult by using that offset load that you're probably already familiar with just from holding that mace. So we're going to get to it. We're going to get into a lot of the movements that you already know, and we're going to incorporate that mace to give you a little bit of a curveball throughout your workouts. Let's get to work. If you know me, you know I love my squats, and I made sure to incorporate the mace in a lot of my squat workouts to make sure that I'm getting the right core stability and uneven distribution to make sure that a lot of my imbalances in my squat can be corrected. So the first variation of our squat with the mace that we're going to use is the front squat. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to use a mismatched handling of this mace. So that mismatched grip is going to be palm down towards the end of the mace and palm up closer to the head. Now, the closer you put that palm up hand towards that mace head, the easier controlling that mace is going to be. So depending on what weight you're using, if you're using a lighter mace, you'll be able to kind of move that hand a little bit further away to make it more difficult. But if you're using a heavier mace, you might have to move that up hand a little bit closer to the head of that mace. So when we're getting set, we're going to get in our comfortable squat position. Now, some people like to go shoulder width. Some people like to go a little bit outside. I'm a little bit outside shoulder width, and I like to point my toes a little bit out rather than straight forward because it helps my hips to push my knees out. So we're going to get in that position, chest proud, core tight, and then we're going to sink that hip straight down towards the floor. We want to avoid those knees going out past our toes. We're just going to sink that hip straight down, push that butt towards the floor, and then as we're coming back up, we're driving those knees out so that we're nice and stable through that movement. Now, it may not look like it, but this weight is pulling me in and over towards that right side. So I'm stabilizing through that right leg and through my core to keep that weight nice and straight and to keep my body going up and down nice and straight. All right, so that's our first variation of the squat. Our second variation is going to be a switch squat. Now this is where tossing that mace around becomes a lot of fun, but it also can become very dangerous. So make sure that you got a nice clear space where you're working out when you're doing types of movements that utilize the switch, okay? So we're gonna get in that same position with that mismatched grip, one palm down at the end, palm up on towards the head. And we're in that same squat position, but what changes is we end up switching that mace from side to side. So utilizing that mace switch, what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring our hands together into a prayer in the middle and then switch sides. And you'll see my left hand is now ended facing up and my right hand with that palm facing down. All right, so when we squat, we're coming up, and as we finish that movement, prayer hands together and then back down on the other side, all right? And then as you get more comfortable with that switch, it becomes a lot more fluid for you to just go back and forth. And again, you're swinging that weight side to side, so your body is constantly adjusting for that mismatched weight going from side to side throughout those reps. And then our last variation for the squat is going to be our back squat. Now this doesn't have as much coordination as that front switch squat, but it does become a little bit more difficult because you're still in that back squat position that you're usually in with an evenly distributed weight. But now that weight's on one side, so not only do you have to control the weight through the squat, but you have to control the weight through your arms. So you're pulling that weight down onto your back and you're keeping that weight nice and stable as you're going up and down. And again, my body is correcting that imbalance throughout my legs and throughout my core. All right, so those are your three variations for your squat. Your squat is a basic movement. It's a movement you're probably already doing in your workouts, but utilizing this mace and utilizing that imbalance is going to help your squat, your fitness, your core tremendously as you work through those three variations. Now we're going to get into our hinge series, utilizing the mace for our deadlifts and our Romanian deadlifts, which isolate our hamstrings and our glutes and give us a little bit of that hip strength while also, again, strengthening our core through that anti-rotation. So our first point to consider here is when we're holding the mace for anything that we're doing out in front of our body, we want to maintain a nice even center line between our hands and between our arms. Because if you start going out here side to side, you're not only not in a strong centered position holding the head of that mace, but then you end up in compromising positions throughout your body when that mace head starts to drift towards either side. So you want to make sure you maintain a nice strong center line there between your arms, between your hands. For our deadlift here, for the first variation, we're going to go shoulder width, chest proud, core tight. And then from there, we're going to go 50-50 between our hips and our knees. So we're going to hinge there at the hips. Once we get to the knees, we're going to bend those knees a little bit more than we would in an RDL, and I'll show you that there in a minute. We're going to come right back up nice and tight, 50-50. You're going to go down through the hips, bend at the knees. You want to keep the mace handle there nice and tight towards your shins. All right, you don't want that mace drifting out here. That's how you round out your back. All right. Just go right down the line of your legs, load up that hip, pop, and squeeze there at the top. Our next variation is our RDL, or Romanian deadlift. That takes the knee bend out of your deadlift and loads up your hips, your hamstrings, and your glutes a little bit more throughout that movement. Okay, so we're going to set up the same way. Nice strong center line there through the handle. We're going to go, you can go a little bit more narrow here in your stance if you want, but again, it's up to you, personal preference and comfort here. You're going to do a couple reps playing around with that foot position. I like to go a little bit inside, shoulder width, chest proud, core tight. And what we're going to do here is same as our warm-up, is we're going to hinge. We're going to push those shoulders down. We're going to push that hip back, load up those hamstrings, up, and nice and tight at the top. So what we can do here is we can soften those knees a little bit. You don't want to be locked out and trying to get down there. You can soften those knees, get a little bit of a bounce through your knees, but then you're going to isolate. Strengthen those quads, those hamstrings, squeeze through your lower body, chest proud, core tight. Again, drop down nice and close there towards your shins. Come up the line of your leg, push that hip forward to the top and squeeze those glutes. So again, as we're going down, this mace head is pulling me down towards the right, but my core is nice, tight, and activated as I'm coming up and down, which keeps that core engaged throughout that whole movement. So that's your RDL. Next up is our Kickstand RDL, which allows us to isolate specifically on one side throughout that hamstring. And again, as with all of our Mace workouts, stabilize that core from side to side. So I'm going to work a little bit on my other side here. I'll give you a good angle. We're going to drop that left foot down in front, and we're going to put that right heel up. So we're just utilizing those right toes to help you balance a little bit. Chest proud, core tight, and we're going to use that same hinge pattern. So I'm dropping my chest down, I'm following the line of my leg down to my shin, my core is nice and tight, up, push that hip forward at the top. But you'll see now I'm isolating through that left hamstring specifically as I'm going up and down. All right, and that mace head is pulling me into rotation, so my core is fighting that with some anti-rotational stability. So that's going to be your Kickstand RDL if you want to throw in a little bit more side-to-side work and isolate those hamstrings on either side. Next, we're going to get into our row series, which includes 3 different variations of a traditional row utilizing the mace and incorporating more core stability as we advance through each of the exercises. So first what we're going to do is we're going to take that mace and we're going to go down to one knee. And what you want to do is you want to drop the knee back behind you where you're going to be rowing on that side. So you got a nice stable front foot here. You want about 90 degrees in that front knee. And then what we're going to do, chest proud, core tight, is we're going to slightly hinge forward. All right, so we don't want to drop those shoulders forward. We want to keep those shoulders back and just hinge forward a little bit there through your hip. And from here, now you'll see I got a nice line of work here, pulling that mace head in towards my hip crease. And what you can do is you can pretty much aim your fist for the top of your pocket. So you want to keep that core nice and tight. And you're going to drive that fist towards the top of your pocket, squeeze there at the top, and then drop that mace head down. What you want to do is you want to try and keep the handle at the end there of that mace in contact with the floor. So you have a little bit almost of a push and a pull there through your hand. You're pushing that mace head down, utilizing a little bit of that wrist rotation that we warmed up earlier, and then you're also pulling there through the mace head. All right, so that's going to give you a nice isolated row through that lat. Our next stage here is going to be an isolated row standing. So what we're going to do is we're going to get in a nice stable shoulder width, soft knees positioned there through our lower body, chest proud, core tight, and then we're going to hinge, same way we did in our RDL. We're going to hinge here, we're going to let that weight come down between us. And what we want to do when we're in that hinge is we want to pull that mace handle apart. We want to keep that tension throughout the whole movement. And that's a tip that you can use throughout a lot of the exercises that you're utilizing the mace for. It's going to keep that center position when you pull that mace handle apart and keep that tension. So you're going to get down into your hinge and we're going to isolate there on that working side down towards the heavy part of the mace. You're going to pull again in towards your hip crease or in towards the top of your pocket. You want to keep that chest proud, that core tight, fight that rotation, and continue pulling that mace handle apart as you're driving that mace head in. And our last progression here throughout our row is our offset row. And what we're going to be doing there is we're not going to isolate through one side. We're going to pull both hands up into the crease of our hip throughout that row movement. So we're going to get in that same position, chest proud, core tight, hinged. And from here, we're pulling that mace handle apart and we're driving that whole mace and that mace handle throughout that center line into the crease of our hip. Now what this does is it not only forces you to pull that mace evenly throughout the core stabilization, but you're also controlling it with that offhand. So that offhand is now working a little bit harder to keep that mace nice and straight throughout that whole movement. So that takes you through your 3 variations of your row with the mace. Now we're going to get into our press progressions, which first and foremost is very important to make sure that you have ample room around you, because now we're getting that mace up and overhead. So you want to make sure that you're not putting that mace through your ceiling. So make sure you got enough space around you. But our first progression here is going to be our anchored press. So again, what we want to do is we want to make sure we have a nice center line there between our hands. We don't want to be out towards one side. Our anchored press, we're going to get into our clean position, which is palms both up. We're here right under the chin, and you want to make sure that you have enough space there in front of you so that you clear your face, because that mace handle will go straight up and it won't feel great. But we're going to get in a nice, stable, strong position here. Soft knees, chest proud, core tight, feet about shoulder width. And our anchored press means that we're going to use that offhand down at the end of that handle to anchor. And we're going to use that strong hand down towards the head of the mace to press and then come back down. So again, you want to keep that anchor nice and tight by pulling apart on that mace handle the whole time. And this is going to allow that mace head to go through a nice line of press there through this movement. All right. So remember, the closer that strong hand is towards the end head of that mace is going to make that a little bit easier. Now, if you bring that hand in, that weight starts to get away from you. You want to keep that nice center line, but they call this the moment arm. The further that weight gets away from that center line, the more difficult it's going to be. So this movement becomes a lot more difficult for me to drive through as my hands get closer. So you want to play around with that hand positioning when you're utilizing that anchored press. Our next variation of the press is going to be our full press. So we're going to get in that same position. We're going to keep that nice strong center line. We're going to drive those hands apart through that mace handle. Nice strong base there through your lower body. Chest proud, core tight through the upper body. And then from here, again, we're going to make sure that we're clearing our face there. You want to be about an inch away from your nose, maybe a little less. But now we're going to go through our full press. So I'm pulling apart that mace. I'm driving up through the ceiling. I'm going to pop my head through there at the end, nice, tall, and strong, and then control it on the way back down. So obviously here, my right arm towards the head of the mace is working a little bit harder, but both of my arms and my full body is nice and tense as I'm pulling that mace handle apart. And of course, that weight, as it gets up and further away from my body, is pulling me towards that right side, but my core is nice, strong, and stable throughout that whole movement. So that's going to be your full press, utilizing both of those hands nice up, tall, and straight there through your full press. And the last variation here is going to be our rotational press, and it's going to go back to step one, utilizing that anchor on that offhand. So again, nice, strong, and stable through your lower body. Chest proud, core tight through the upper body, pulling apart, keeping that center line there through the handle. And from here, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go back to that anchored press, but we're gonna rotate. And we're gonna rotate by taking that strong side foot and we're gonna turn it as we go. So you'll see my heel comes up, I drive, and then I'm back down towards my center line and my strong stable position there at the beginning. So as I'm pressing, I'm rotating, core tight, drive through that back foot, stabilize through that front foot, and back towards your starting position. So as you start getting a little bit more comfortable with this movement, you can start making it a little bit more explosive, a little bit more quick and controlled, but you want to make sure that you are mastering that movement first and mastering pulling that apart and mastering your stability before you start tossing that mace around. But you can always progress this to a little bit more of an explosive movement through your rotational press. Now we're going to start working on our core, and start is being used loosely because as we've been working through these exercises, you know that that core has been working overtime to stabilize your body and to stabilize this mace. What we're going to do is we're going to get away from boring sit-ups and crunches and planks and things like that, and we're going to start utilizing this mace to really isolate and work on those abs and get you ready for next summer. So our first variation here is going to be nice and even. We're going to get our feet set a little bit outside shoulder width, and we're going to be nice and stable here. And what we're going to do is we're going to side dig. So when you want to think about digging a hole there right in front of you, you're going to bring that mace across your body, you're going to dig that hole, and then you're going to come all the way up to your end position here. So this is your starting position and your ending position. You're going to pull that mace across, dig, rotate, and end in that same, almost kind of like a rifle position. So you come across and you can start picking up the momentum here, and you're gonna feel as that mace moves from the right side of your body coming across to the left and then bringing it back in. That core is what's ultimately moving that weight all the way around. Even though your arms are directing that weight, your core is what's stabilizing and bringing your body back to that straight position. We're going to advance that side dig by going into a front dig. So when we think about our front dig, you want to put one leg forward and one leg back. So you're in this offset stance. And from there, how you want to visualize this is the leg that's back is going to allow you to dig that hole there in front of you. So if I tried to do this there with my leg in front, I'm going to end up hitting my leg and kind of being a little bit imbalanced as I'm coming up. So I'm going to drop my left leg back, I'm going to plant my right foot forward, and then I'm going to put that mace there on my left side. So I'm coming across my body, I'm going to dig the head of that mace out in front of me. You can utilize, and I would suggest utilizing a nice high grip to start here so you can control that mace on the way up. But again, as you slide that hand down, it becomes a lot more difficult because you're putting the weight of that mace out in front of you and then having to have your core come all the way back and bring you back up to your starting position. So we're across our body, we're going to dig that hole out in front. You want to extend those arms, dig, and then you're going to toss that dirt up and over your opposite shoulder. So you're literally just digging a hole here with the mace, but as you get 10, 12, 15, 20 reps there on one side and then switch, you're really going to feel that core fire up. So again, we're getting away from crunches, planks, things like that, and we're actively utilizing that core not only to move our body, but to stabilize our body in our starting and finishing positions. Now we're going to round out our Mace Basics with some arms. And we're going to focus on our triceps and a few different variations for our biceps. So our tricep press here is going to be very similar to our anchored press, but we're going to start here up and over top. So again, we're going to get in that nice stable position, chest proud, core tight, up and over our head. When we think about a Skullcrusher, we're just going to drive that mace head up, squeeze that tricep, and we're using that offhand to anchor there through that opposite side. Now again, as we're going up and down, as always, that core is stabilizing, and you want to make sure that you're pulling that mace handle apart. Next, we're going to get into some curls. So there's a couple different variations for the way that you can do curls here. Again, all of our rules still apply. Chest proud, core tight. We want to pull that handle apart as best we can. So we're keeping a nice straight center line there. Our first variation is going to be an anchored curl. So we're going to anchor with that offhand, and we're going to curl up there through that strong side where that mace head is. So again, as we get further away, more stabilization there through the wrist, through the elbow, but we can always come closer to that mace head and isolate there through that bicep. Our second variation is going to be a full curl. So again, we're pulling apart, nice and centered, and we're using that offhand now to help drive that entire mace up through that curl. Now you can see it's a little bit of an unstable movement, but that's just going to force our arms to stabilize there through those muscles as we're getting that mace up through that full movement. Next, we're going to get into two more variations of our curl that are a little bit more fun and a little bit more progressing towards some of those fun mace movements that you've been seeing outside of our basics here. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go back to that prayer switch for a curl. So when we were doing our squats, remember we were bringing our hands there into a prayer in the middle and then coming back to that switch grip position. So what we're going to do there is we're going to curl up, switch, and come back down. So if you're utilizing a lighter mace, you can find a little bit of speed here through that curl. If you're using a heavier one, this one might be a little bit more difficult to get through that prayer switch. But that gives you a little bit of a variation of just moving that weight side to side to focus on those biceps. And our last variation here is probably the most fun one that we're going to get to today, but it's our curl toss. And again, you want to make sure that when we're tossing that mace, that it's not going through your light fixture or your fan or your ceiling. You want to make sure that you got enough clearance to get through this movement. But we're going to start in that nice, strong position, pulling that handle apart, and we're pretty much going to curl and toss the head of this mace up and over to the other side. So I want to make sure that I'm ready for this offhand to catch that mace towards the head on the opposite side. So I'm going to toss, switch, and catch. Toss, switch, and catch. So you can find a little bit of a pause here up at the top to switch and then let that momentum bring that mace back down to your catching hand. But it's also important to focus that we're not only driving up through that bicep to get the curl and the toss, but as I'm catching it, I want to decelerate and use that eccentric motion to come down and gather the weight of that mace without pulling me side to side. So again, core tight, we're going to toss up. You can get a little bit of a pause there in the middle. You want to keep your eyes on the mace the whole time because again, this mace is made of concrete If you got a mace from me, it's made of concrete. If you got a mace elsewhere, it's probably made of steel. So either one of those items is going to go through your floor, especially if you have hardwood floors or anything like that. But again, we're just finding a flow here. We're tossing that mace up, getting a little bit of a pause. We're isolating those biceps. So we're not only pushing it up towards the ceiling, but we're catching and being nice and strong with that deceleration back down to your starting position. So again, as you get a little bit more familiar with how your mace is moving, we're going to get into a little bit more movements such as that, with that mace moving around and nice and controlled. But that is a great way to isolate those biceps and have a little bit of fun with your mace. So let's take some time to review some of the key points that we went over through our Mace Basics. First and foremost, always important when you're working out, is to get a nice, good, efficient warm-up in so that you're not jumping into your workouts cold and increasing your risk for injury. Number two is to maintain that stable and strong positioning through chest proud, core tight. And then after that, when we're utilizing the mace, we always want to remember that the closer that our strong hand is towards the head of the mace, the easier the workout will be and the more controlled you will be with controlling that offset weight towards the strong side. As you move that hand in, the exercises will become more difficult, and that weight on the end there will seem a little bit heavier or more heavier as you bring that hand in and in and in. As we're utilizing the mace, we always want to make sure that we're pulling apart, we're driving those hands away from each other, and we want to keep that center line between our hands, because as the mace starts drifting out or drifting in, then we're imbalanced even more, and this could be a position that puts this shoulder on the right in a bad position while this offhand on the left isn't doing much work. All right, so you always want to make sure that you have that center position. So that concludes our Mace Basics. We went over some of the tips to get you immediately started in using your mace safely and effectively. And we also went over a lot of the different exercises that you're probably already doing with different pieces of equipment. However, utilizing the mace and incorporating the mace into those movements that you're already familiar with make those movements more challenging, more unique, and a little bit more novel and exciting for you to utilize in your workouts. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for tuning in.